All right, we know there'll be a lot of movement at the quarterback position this offseason, maybe this year more than any. The Steel City no different with their two-time champ. Steelers GM Kevin Colbert lukewarm on Big Ben's future, saying adjustments of his contract will have to be made. Mr. Smith, this is your squad. You've been watching them for years, rooting for him, paying attention to them closely. What more does Big Ben have to prove?
Well, for me personally, listen, I think he needs a running game. I think he needs an improved offensive line and a better defense that, in terms of getting to the passer, would definitely help him because it'll give him more opportunities to make up for the mistakes he will inevitably and predictably make. In the end, it's not that Big Ben is some scrub. It's not like he's somebody that can't play the game of football. It's just that when we think about the elite quarterbacks in the game of football, he's no longer on that level. Simply makes too many mistakes in order to be considered on that level. And as a result, they've got a decision to make. He's going to count on more than 41.2 million against their cap. He's going to need to take at least a $17 million pay cut in order for them to keep him around. He says he doesn't care about the money, and that's going to be tested because the Steelers are definitely going to test him. With Mason Rudolph and now Dwayne Haskins, that ain't going to cut it. He's very fortunate that that's the fallback plan the Steelers have in place because there's no way in hell the Steelers should go into next season with Mason Rudolph or Dwayne Haskins as their starting quarterback. So basically, Big Ben could be the quarterback by default so long as he's willing to shave some of the salary that he's owed next season. But in the end, in terms of how much more does he have to prove, he's a two-time champion. He's been to 3 Super Bowls, but it's been a while since that's transpired in his career. He's had opportunities to get it done. He's had elite receivers to work with. He still hasn't been able to get it done. He's no longer considered a star. He's just a name right now in terms of Big Ben. He's not a scrub, but he's no longer that guy. So, I mean, to me, the one thing that he does have to prove is that if you give him the pieces necessary, he can he can stop making some of the predictable mistakes that he has made and lead them to something more than what they have right now. That hasn't been the case, and that's unfortunate. But he's not a scrub. He can still play, and I hope that he ends up staying. He's just going to have to give up some of that money so they can go out and utilize that cap space or the cap space it'll create to go out there and get some much-needed help for him because he can't do it by himself.
Ben Roethlisberger has nothing left to prove. We already know what he was in his career at his best. As you mentioned, Stephen A., he's a multiple-time Super Bowl winner. Once as a young player who was an excellent football player, but not a great quarterback yet, so he'd mess up but then make a tackle in the open field in the playoffs. Remember that? And then another time as a more seasoned quarterback who's a truly great player. I don't think he can win a Super Bowl anymore. I think it's going to be very difficult to win a Super Bowl with Roethlisberger. I agree the offensive line is the issue on that team, as it was for several years, maybe 5 or 6 years ago. They can't run block at all. I don't think it's an issue. If you need better running backs, they can't run block. And they can't pass protect. So he's getting rid of the ball super fast and not really a very different kind of style than we're used to seeing him playing. But what does he really have to prove? We know he's going to the Hall of Fame. We know he's truly a great quarterback at his best, and he's had enough career accomplishments. But at his best, he was never, ever the best quarterback in the game. And he usually wasn't even really in the argument for top 3. Here and there, certain years, people maybe would argue maybe he's a top 3 quarterback, but early on it was Brett Favre and Peyton Manning and Tom Brady, and then it was Drew Brees replacing Brett Favre, and then later on it was Aaron Rodgers replacing Peyton Manning, I guess you'd say, but he was never in that first tier. He was the best of the rest, or if he wasn't that first tier, he was always the last guy in that first tier. Is that going to suddenly change? If you want to say he has anything to prove, I guess you could say he has to prove he can still win a Super Bowl on the right team because the Steelers have an excellent defense, and I think they have more or less enough offense. They could draft another offensive weapon. They really have to fix the line. But do you think with a fixed line, Roethlisberger is your Super Bowl quarterback? He's a competent quarterback still. But are you going to win a Super Bowl with Ben Roethlisberger now? I don't think so.
I'm not going to call him competent. I think that's kind of disrespectful to him. The guy threw for 3,800 yards. He had 33 touchdowns and 10 interceptions, completing 65% of his passes. My goodness. That's not to look at him and say he's finished. That's not a finished quarterback. Those are some pretty decent numbers. The problem is they lost 4 of their last 5 games to end the regular season, and then they lost in the postseason to the Cleveland Browns. So they end the season losing 5 of their last 6. And I blame it primarily on their offensive line and their running game. And Pouncey just retired. You got to fix that offensive line, and you got to get a better running back to James Conner. I like James Conner as a person. I love his story. Please don't get me wrong, but I'm just of the mindset you got to get a better running back than James Conner. You just have to do that, or Snell for that matter. When you look at the wideouts that they have available to them with Juju Smith-Schuster and Claypool and Ebron and James Washington and these boys, I just look at them and I say, listen, they got a passing attack. They got a passing attack. The problem is when they put too much on Ben's shoulders and they say, throw the ball 50 or 60 times and take us there. No, run the ball, stop the run. That was Mike Tomlin's mantra when he first got introduced as new head coach of the Pittsburgh Steelers, and you just got to hope that they can get that together. I hope that Ben's not gone because I don't like their options. I do not like Mason Rudolph as an option. I damn sure don't like Dwayne Haskins as an option. There's no way in hell that you're the Steelers and you can go into the season with one of them as your starting quarterback. This franchise will go nowhere fast.
They got to find the next. They got to find the next guy. They haven't done a good enough job finding the next guy.
But until they do, you keep Big Ben Roethlisberger. You showcase for him how he needs to take this pay cut to help the team move forward, and you go with it from there. He said he's made enough money. It's about playing and it's about winning. Well, guess what? We're going to take the money that we shaved from your salary, and we're going to utilize it to get better assets in here to help you do exactly what you say you want to do. That's their option.
Real quick, if you want to look at Tom Brady, who's the GOAT as a blueprint, but as I mentioned earlier, rarely considered the number one player in the sport as like the best guy. You want to look at him as a blueprint? He's the only one that, to my mind, that I can remember off the top of my head who consistently took less money. He's the only one. And then he's the GOAT. And those two things are probably related, unfortunately.
Yeah, but obviously really different situation with his wife making more money than him. Bird in the hand, better than 2 in the bush. But fellas, Big Ben was 22nd in total QBR in 2020, sandwiched between Goff and Trubisky and Schefter. Max? I know you and Carson Wentz have a special relationship, so tell me this. Do you think the Eagles are the losers in this deal?
I can't believe that's a question. Of course they're the winners here. Or they are certainly a winner here. The Eagles took a contract.
Wait, I said are the Eagles the losers?
No, they're the winners. They're the winners. They're not the losers. They're the winners. Okay. They had a contract that looked immovable to me. They had a guy who I pointed out, they had a guy who I pointed out through the second half of 2019 was regressing shockingly. And then we saw it continue in 2020 to the point where he became the worst starter at the position in football. He was the worst quarterback in the NFL, the worst starting quarterback. And then, you know what happens to the worst starting quarterback in the NFL? They lose their job. He was so bad, he was the worst starter, and then he wasn't a starter anymore. That's how bad he was. And they have that contract, his guy in his 5th year, who was so bad that he lost his job. And that guy has an elite contract. He has the contract of a top 5 quarterback. He has the contract of a guy who's not only supposed to not make as many mistakes as he did, not be the worst guy in the league, not lose his job. He has the contract of a guy who's so good he's supposed to make up for other deficiencies on your team. That's why you're able to pay him that money. That's the Donovan McNabb type thing, Stephen A., in Philadelphia. And when that guy is the worst starter in the league and loses his job, how do you even move that deal? They moved the deal and got a 3rd-round pick this season. I want to point out, they couldn't even get a 2nd-round pick this season. But they did get a 3rd, and they have a conditional 2nd-round pick where if Wentz doesn't lose his job in Indianapolis, they're going to wind up with a 1st. Of course they didn't lose the deal, Stephen A. They took a guy who's going to take this player and got a 3rd and a 2nd, potentially a 1st. That's a win.
I think you're completely wrong about this on several fronts. Number one, we don't know how good the Philadelphia Eagles are going to be because Jalen Hurts only completed 52% of his passes, and we don't know what kind of quarterback he's going to be. He wasn't lights out. He was 1-3 as a starter. He certainly showed potential. He certainly had big plays. Obviously, he's got wheels. He can move without the ball. He can run the football, and as a result, he galvanized the troops to some degree. But in the end, we don't know what the hell the Philadelphia Eagles are going to be, which is something we'll get into later. But let's look at the Indianapolis Colts. They were a top 10 offense and a top 10 defense. They lose a quarterback in Phil Rivers that threw for over 4,000 yards. 24 touchdowns and 11 interceptions, but he was a relatively stationary target, very immobile. He wasn't a threat to run the football against anybody. Got rid of the ball relatively quickly. We'll give him credit for that. But basically, he was on the tail end of his career, which is proof because he just retired. Having said all of that, what do you have? You have a running game led by Jonathan Taylor, who's a 1,000-yard rusher. You've got guys like T.Y. Hilton and Pittman Jr. and others that are good receivers. You have an offensive line that is considered elite. Even in a down year based on injuries, they were still a top 7 offensive line in the game. And Carson Wentz is coming from a team where he was sacked 50 times, a team that surrendered 65 sacks. That is the Philadelphia Eagles, albeit to some degree it was his fault because he held on to the ball too damn long. But clearly, anybody will tell you that the Eagles' offensive line was highly suspect, which is something even you pointed out before. They gave up 65 sacks last year, 50 at the hands of Carson Wentz. And he is going to a team that surrendered 19 sacks the entire season. Entire season. And I think they were one of the top teams in terms of hits allowed on their quarterback because it was like 32 or less, something around that number. This offensive line led by that monster, Quentin Nelson. I mean, this is who they are. They protect. They run block. They pass protect. This is what they do. And so when you look at it from that perspective and you look at the pieces that they have, and they were just in the playoffs, and then you look at the fact that Carson Wentz is being reunited with Frank Reich, the offensive coordinator in 2017. Last time they were together, which was 3 years ago, what did he do? They were 11-2, and Carson Wentz was an MVP candidate. I look at all of those things, and I say the Indianapolis Colts won with this because I don't expect Carson Wentz to go there and stink up the joint because he'll have a better coach. He'll be in a better situation. He'll be surrounded by better players.
Okay,
and I think as a result, he will resurrect his career to some degree anyway.
Answers. Yes or no answers. Let me ask you some questions. Is the Eagles' offensive line the Colts' offensive line?
No.
Does Frank Reich coach the Eagles?
Does he coach the Eagles? No, he coaches the Colts.
Right. So, like, that's the situation. But, right, the Eagles don't have that stuff. So even if you're right, I agree that you could take a flyer on Carson Wentz if you're the Colts because you do have if Carson Wentz can't make it work in Indianapolis, he can't make it work. But they have a reclamation project on their hands. They have a coach who believes he knows how to do it because he's worked with him before when he was very good. As you mentioned, they have an offensive line anchored by one of the best guards on the offensive line I've ever seen in Quentin Nelson. There's like a force field around him when he plays. No one can come within 10 yards of him, apparently, is the rule. Like, he is unbelievable, and that line is very good. You mentioned the running game. You mentioned a lot of stuff. The Eagles don't have those things. The Eagles don't have them, so Carson Wentz doesn't work there. He may not work in Indianapolis, but as you point out, they have a shot. But he doesn't work in Philly. So what did the Eagles wind up getting for a guy who simply doesn't work there? And by the way, divided the locker room. Was talking to the press, or certainly whether or not he was leaking. I find it hard to believe he wasn't. When it would come out, Carson Wentz will demand a trade. He has no interest in being a backup. He'll want to trade if he's a backup to Hurts the day that Hurts is starting for the first time in the NFL. That kind of undermining influence in the locker room, in addition to a situation that doesn't work given the team, means the Eagles got to get rid of him. They got to get out from under that deal, right? So the fact that they were able to do it is one thing. The fact that if it works for the Colts, as you suggest it could, or that maybe even that is likely, the Eagles are going to get a third and a first? Oh, my God. I thought they were going to have to give up stuff to move that contract. Why would they get a first?
Why would they get a first?
Because it's a conditional second. The condition is, remember when we were joking about this yesterday, what are the conditions? The condition is, I think, 70 or 75% of the snaps. In other words, if Carson Wentz stays healthy and keeps the starting job, that second turns into a first. Mm-hmm. And even if it doesn't, a third and a second. So, Stephen A., even if they don't draft a quarterback, if they say, let's give Hurts a look for a year without a quarterback competition, maybe we'll just bring in a veteran starter to compete with Jalen Hurts, they still have draft capital to draft a quarterback next year if they want.
Yeah. But what you're doing is making the case that the Eagles are justified in letting go of Carson Wentz. Nobody's disagreeing with that. But when the question is being asked, are the Eagles losers in a Wentz trade, I'm comparing them to the benefit that the Colts get from it. And if the Colts get a starting quarterback who shines and leads them to the playoffs and potentially Super Bowl contention because they're one of the top teams in the AFC, then I consider that a win, even even though the Eagles were absolutely right in getting rid of Wentz because they don't have the personnel that the Indianapolis Colts have, it still doesn't negate the fact that the Colts ended up better off because they're going to be a better team. They're going to look better. They're going to be in the postseason, and they're going to have a quarterback who's aged 28 and moving forward because they got the right coach in place to coach him and the right organization led by Chris Ballard to oversee him. I think that's where you're answering the question.
Yep, you're betting on Wentz, and that's possible.
I'm betting on the Colts. I'm betting on the Colts.
Well, except that Wentz really does have, like, Reich and DeFilippo reportedly thought they needed to build him back up from the ground up.
Yeah.
So if they can
Doesn't
do
mean
that,
they're better
yes.
off than the Colts.
If they
Not better
can't,
off
they're
than the
better
Colts.
off with Phillip Rivers.
Bottom line.
There's an important note. There's an important note I want to mention before we close out here. The